Hello everybody, Noah here with Learn Meta-Analysis, and congratulations on getting this far in this introductory course to systematic review and meta-analysis. So in this video, we're going to summarize some of the key points that we have discussed in a little bit more depth in other videos, and so this is just going to be a high-level overview of some of those things. So by the end of this video, I want you to be able to identify some of the essential components one should look for when reading a systematic review or meta-analysis. So in other words, I want you to be able to be a more informed reader. Second, I want you to be able to describe the key steps in the systematic review or meta-analysis process. And third, I want you to be able to identify essential statistics that are used in meta-analysis. So with that said, I want to start at a really high level, just like we did in the beginning of the course, and take a step back and think, what are we talking about here when we're talking about systematic review and meta-analysis? So if you recall, I said that we can largely lump the category of reviews into two large piles: non-systematic reviews, of which there's a lot of different types, and systematic reviews, again, of which there's a lot of different types. And note that there is a little bit of a confusing terminology here, because systematic review is both an umbrella term that refers to a bunch of different review types that use systematic methods, as well as an actual methodology itself. So that's a little bit confusing. In this video, I'm primarily going to be using the term as the specific method itself, although there's a number of times where I'm referring to it as an umbrella term. So I'll try and be clear about that as we go through this video. So some of the key components that we want to see in a well-reported systematic review, and right now I'm using this as an umbrella term, so I'm referring to all types of systematic reviews. So first and foremost, we want to see that the reporting is aligned with the PRISMA standard. So we had a different video where I introduced these. Hopefully you took a few minutes to actually read those articles. PRISMA is very, very helpful, and it is the in thing right now, at least in my field of education, educational technology, educational psychology. When it comes to methods, we really need to make sure that our methods are aligned with the PRISMA standards when we are reporting our manuscripts. Why? Well, it helps ensure our methods are replicable and transparent, and really that's what systematic reviews, in my opinion, are about. It's about what separates them from a non-systematic review is the methodology used, and primarily what's different here is we have replicable and transparent methods. We don't have to guess why we found certain studies and didn't find others. The method should make it very, very clear what papers we found and what papers we didn't and why. Okay, so the next thing that I look for are the search terms. Honestly, when I read reviews a lot of times, the first thing I do is read the introduction to get the general idea of what they're talking about, and then I jump right down to the methods, and I start skimming the methods to make sure there's not anything major missing. And after I skim, then I go back and I read the whole paper start to finish, and I find that just helps me better contextualize when I read these types of papers. But one of the things I'm looking for is that appropriate search terms have been used and appropriate databases are searched. And what I mean by that is not only in regards to the relevance of these search terms and the relevance of the databases. That is by far really important, but we also need to make sure that the coverage is there. I have the word quantity on the screen, but I think a better term might be coverage, in that we want to make sure these search terms are comprehensive and the database search are comprehensive. We don't want to just search one database unless there's a very specific reason for that. We want to make sure that we are locating all of the studies when we're trying to conduct a comprehensive review like a systematic review or meta-analysis tends to be. Okay, so next we have our research questions. It's very, very important that our research questions are clear and easily understood by the reader. Second, it is also very important that our research questions are academically interesting, and what that means is that they are driven by the literature. And last but not least, with our research questions, we need to make sure that we can actually answer them using the methods that are being used in the paper. So that means we need to make sure that both the data being extracted can answer those questions and the analysis methods that we're using can answer those questions. Next, we also want to make sure that it is reported how the data were actually extracted, and we want to check for inter-rater reliability or inter-rater agreement for this step. And we want to make sure that this was actually done and reported. And I can tell you that at least as of now, mid-2024, it is relatively common to see inter-rater reliability or inter-rater agreement not reported in a manuscript. And I think this is something that is changing over time. It used to be less frequent that we'd see it, and now we're seeing it reported more and more and more as more people understand Prisma and are aware of Prisma. So this is something that's definitely going to be in there. I think it's just really easy to forget to include. I don't think people are forgetting to do inter-rater reliability during their process. I think it's likely just one of those things that you forget to include in the manuscript as you're writing it up, because it seems like a relatively small detail, but it is nonetheless an important detail. So we need to make sure that that is reported. We also want to make sure that the results align with the type of systematic review it claims to be. So in a previous video, I discussed how scoping reviews tend to be more high level and look at the nature of the field, whereas systematic reviews, and here I'm talking about systematic review as a method, not as an umbrella term, but as a specific method, those should be more analytical and be analyzing things in more depth. They're really focusing on synthesis. So we want to make sure that if something's claiming to be a systematic review, they're really synthesizing data and not just giving us descriptive data only like we might see in a scoping review. Okay, so let's talk about the key steps that we want to see in this process now. So if you were going to conduct a systematic review, what are some of the key steps we need to have? And here I am using systematic review again as an umbrella term, not as a specific method, but all of the systematic review methods are going to follow a similar process. First and foremost, we often establish our research questions. We figure out what it is that we want to examine. Second, we tend to come up with our literature search strategy, our inclusion criteria, and our exclusion criteria. And it's at this point that we should consider pre-registering our systematic review. So if you're not familiar with the push towards open science, pre-registration is something that a lot of people are encouraging researchers to do. It is not super common yet with systematic reviews in our field, or I should say in the field of education, ed tech, ed psych. But I would say it is something that is up and coming. It is something that people are becoming more aware of, and we're seeing it more and more. So I guess the question is, will it catch on and become a requirement for publication? I honestly don't know at this point. But I would say that if you're interested in open science, even if you're not interested in open science, I would encourage you to read about pre-registration and the push towards this and understand really what it is, and then you can make your own decision as to if you feel you should pre-register your study or not. Okay, so after those decisions are made, we're next going to actually search our literature, which is going to help us build our database. And when I'm referring to our database in this context, I'm really just talking about our list of studies. So this is going to be titles, abstracts, and citation information. Next, we go to our phase 1 screening. This tends to be abstracts and titles, and we're looking to see if they meet the inclusion criteria. Then we move into our full text screening for the ones that were retained from phase 1, where we're looking at the full text to see if they meet the inclusion criteria. And then we get to something quite time-consuming, or what tends to be quite time-consuming, which is data extraction, although you might also hear this referred to as coding. This is when we're taking information out of the primary study and we're starting to build our data set. Last but not least, we have our data analysis, which for many types of systematic reviews tends to be thematic qualitative analysis, whereas for a meta-analysis, there's a number of specific quantitative methods depending upon the type of meta-analysis you're doing, either conventional meta-analysis, 3-level meta-analysis, Bayesian meta-analysis, etc. So, what do we need to see in a meta-analysis? What statistics should we be looking for as a reader, and what do we want to make sure we are reporting as a researcher? Well, first, we're probably going to see an overall effect size and some accompanying statistics with that, such as the p-value, the confidence interval, etc. Next, we're going to see our heterogeneity statistics. This would be things like Q, I-squared, and tau-squared. We're also going to be looking for those outlier and influence diagnostics, and we're probably going to have a number of moderator or subgroup analyses, or perhaps they did meta-regression. And last but not least, we're going to have some publication bias tests. Okay, so if we're going to summarize this here, if I want to think about some of the really high-level takeaways I want you guys to have from this. First and foremost, please remember that systematic review is both an umbrella term that has lots of different specific types, and it's its own specific method. Second, please remember that the methodological decisions you make are incredibly important. Okay, these decisions decide the scope of your paper and how generalizable your paper is. It can essentially decide if your paper is worth reading or not, because if you don't use the proper search terms, you're not going to locate your studies that you need. If you don't search the right databases, you're not going to get comprehensive coverage. If you don't extract the right data, you're not going to be able to answer your research questions. If you don't use the right analysis technique, you're not going to be able to answer the questions in the way you want to answer them. So long story short here, please take your time when planning systematic reviews and meta-analyses. It will save you time in the long run to do good planning. Next, please recall that systematic reviews in general are qualitative, or tend to be qualitative, I should say, whereas meta-analyses are certainly quantitative. Like meta-analysis is a specific quantitative technique. There are a number of different ones. As I mentioned just a moment ago, conventional, 3-level, using robust variance estimation, Bayesian meta-analysis, structural equation modeling meta-analysis. There's a bunch of specific analytical models that are forms of meta-analysis. So please keep that in mind when you are conducting them. I've seen a number of papers that claim to be meta-analyses, but then they only qualitatively analyze the data. So they're really types of systematic reviews. So just please keep that differentiation in your mind. As I just mentioned, there's a number of different forms of meta-analysis, but in the educational field, we're currently seeing mostly conventional meta-analyses, and there is an increase in the number of 3-level meta-analyses being conducted. They are by far the most common that I've seen. And last but not least, I haven't said this explicitly yet, but I hope that you've kind of picked up on this as we've gone through this process. The process for conducting a systematic review and a meta-analysis are almost identical until the data analysis phase. The only thing that might really differ is how you are extracting your data, because how you might extract results data, for example, or comparison data for a systematic review could be different than how you're extracting it for a meta-analysis. However, up until that point, everything can look the same. We're using the same literature search strategies, we're recording the same information, we're following very, very similar reporting standards with Prisma, we're going through the phase 1 and phase 2 screening. We're making sure we report iterator reliability for data coding. So these two things, if they seem similar to you, they are. They're very, very similar. I like to conceptually think about it as systematic review is the qualitative approach and meta-analysis is the quantitative approach. That's the way I kind of organize these things in my mind, and I find that helps me because when I'm thinking about a study, I often don't necessarily at first think about if I want to conduct a systematic review or a meta-analysis. I at first think of the question I'm trying to solve, and then I decide which method is going to help me reach that goal. So these are two very complementary sets of methods, and they are very related to one another, but meta-analysis is always quantitative. So that's just something to keep in mind. Meta-analysis refers to very specific computational models. Okay, so that pretty much sums up our video course here. I hope this has been really helpful for you guys. I hope this worked as a really great introduction. So now when you read these papers, you understand better what it is that you're reading and what it is that you should be looking for. Hopefully you understand how to interpret them better. Hopefully the statistics aren't as scary as they seemed before. And if you're someone who wants to actually conduct a meta-analysis or systematic review, I hope this really gets you excited about this process. I know that watching a whole bunch of videos and reading books and starting to do the research so you can do these analyses, it's time consuming, but all of this planning is going to pay off. Okay, conducting systematic reviews and meta-analyses are going to help you really understand the field that you're working in. That's why I tend to encourage graduate students to work on them early in their academic career, because I just found, for me and everybody I know who's gone through this process, they have always been thankful that they conducted a systematic review or a meta-analysis early in their career, because it helped them understand the field that they are making their career in. It really gave them a good, deep understanding of the content. And that's really the purpose of a systematic review or meta-analysis, is to really deeply understand the field and help synthesize the results. They just go about it in a little bit different ways with either qualitative or quantitative analyses. So that said, this wraps up this introductory course. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I look forward to talking to you all in other video courses. Thank you, and I hope you guys learned a lot.